The next story I want to tell you is about a real person. His name was Wiley Oakley. And Wiley was born in 1885, and he died in 1954. And he's buried in Gatlinburg on that hillside behind the village shopping mall. If you go to the back of it, you can go up to the graveyard, and he's in the far end on the right. You can find Wiley Oakley's grave up there. But Wiley Oakley was a guide. He would take people around, and he knew a lot about the Smokies, and he would tell them all the things in the Smokies. And he was also a storyteller. And one time he wrote down some of his stories in that book I showed you. And he told real life stories, things that actually happened to him. And also, now and then, he would tell some foolish story, and he would yodel after it, and that meant that you could believe it or not. But I want to tell you one of those real stories out of the book. And it's about a wildfire. Now, do any of you remember the big, destructive wildfire that happened in the Smoky Mountains in Gatlinburg, Pigeons Forge, back in 2016? Supposedly, so we read in Wikipedia, it was started by two boys up at Chimney Tops. And that fire got out of hand. It was real dry. The wind blew that fire, and it did a whole lot of damage. It was the most terrible fire that had ever happened in Tennessee. Killed 14 people, lots of property damage. Well, I want to tell you a Wiley story now. And the Wiley story, a fire happens because of four boys. We'll be telling Wiley stories when we come mountain man. Sing it. We'll be telling Wiley stories when we come mountain man. We'll be telling Wiley stories. We'll be telling Wiley stories. We'll be telling Wiley stories when we come mountain man. Well, this story we'll call Wiley and the Wildfire. Well, one time, Wiley was probably 8 to 10 years old. This had been about 1895, somewhere along in there. And he went into the woods one night to do some hunting. They were hunting possum. And they took along with them a rifle gun, a cap and ball, firing gun. They took also a pole axe. Now, I don't know if this is exactly a real kind of a pole axe. Wiley said it had a 2-foot handle. This is about 8 inches longer, so I don't know if it is a pole axe or a variation. But they took with them a pole axe that had a sharp bit on one end. That was for chopping. And they would use that if they happened to tree an animal and couldn't get it any other way. They just chopped down the tree to get that animal. The other end was flat, like a hammer. So that was a 1-bit pole axe. He said that other people in the mountains, they had a 2-bit. So that meant it had 2 axes. 1 axe on one side, 1 on the other. So they took that pole axe with them, the rifle gun, the lantern, and they went hunting that night. Well, they didn't catch anything. And it was sort of cool. It used to be in the Smokies, it gets very cool at night. It's not getting as cool anymore. And so they built them a little campfire in the woods. And they were sitting around the campfire just talking, having a good time. They decided to do a little activity, a little game, have a little fun with something called popping coals. Popping coals. Now here's what that meant. That meant you get a flat rock and now you spit on it. And then you get your pole axe and you spit on the hammer side. And then you get a hot coal out of the fire and you put it on that spit, on that flat rock, and then you would pop. That thing would pop. It would fire off. It sounded like a gun. So, of course, those boys like that sound. So they going around and popping coals and having fun doing that. Now, Wiley, I think, was probably one of the older ones in that group, one of the young ones, that is, because they didn't let him pop coals. What he had to do was to watch for sparks. If they missed that coal and it went into the bushes or something, there might be a fire, there might be sparks. So that was Wiley's job. And the other fella, there was an Ogle, and there was also a Huskey fella, and his brother were there. So that was Wiley's job, to watch out for sparks. They got tired of that game after a while, of popping coals, and so they decided to go hunting again. So they got the rifle guns, and they walked away. They made sure the fire was out good, and started walking away. Well, as they were walking away, they heard something behind them, loud sounds, sounds out like trees falling down, and they looked back, and there was a big fire. So they thought, oh, Lord, there must have been a spark in the bushes. So they ran back and tried to put that fire out, but it got too big way too soon from that, and there was fire everywhere, all around them. They said, oh, Lord, we got to get out of here. Well, the three older boys, there was a kind of a small break in the flames, and so they went through it one after the other. But as they did, that flame started getting bigger and higher, and a smaller passageway through. And by the time it was time for Wiley to go through that fire, he said, not me. I'm too afeared. So he started running away from the fire. And that fire was being blown towards him. And so he was running and running, trying to get away. Well, that fire was spreading all around him. And the fellas were hollering for Wiley to come on back, but there was no way for him to get through the flames. And they had to go on home without Wiley. Well, Wiley was running and running. What was he going to do? What would you do if you were in the wild wood fire like that?
Panic.
Panic, all right. I think Wiley was panicking, all right. But he came to a big old log, a holler log in there in the woods, in the wild woods. And he decided to climb in that thing. So he climbed in head first, and luckily there wasn't a bear or a snake in there. And he was able to wiggle and get inside that hollow log. And pretty soon, that hot flame, those fires were coming right near Wiley and over that log. Oh, and it was getting so hot in that log. He was being baked, 350 degrees. And he was hot, but and the air was smoke, so he couldn't breathe too good either. So he took his old hat and he put it over his face to sort of filter that smoke. And he was okay then. It wasn't great, but he was better than he was. So he stayed in that log all the time that fire raged around him. Well, when the fire, the sound, and the noise died down, Wiley creeped out of that log and looked around, and he saw burned and charred tree stumps everywhere, dead animals. It was terrible. And he looked at that log. He tried to figure out how come he survived. The log was a chestnut log. Now, Wiley says that often the timbermen would call a chestnut an acid tree. And a lot of times chestnuts were cut down and their acid was got out of them. And some forms of acid they used to tan leather, for example, so it was a valuable thing. And he realized that because that chestnut tree had acid, the fire did not burn him up and barbecue him that night. And he was real grateful for that chestnut tree. Well, he didn't know where he was in the wild woods, but he decided to stay there the night. And this time he backed into that log so he'd have a little more breathing air. And he went to sleep. And I don't know if Wiley slept like a log, but he was sleeping in a log for sure. The next day, of course, those boys had gone back and alerted the family that Wiley might be dead, and they were searching for him, and he could hear his brother's voice. "Oh, Wiley! Oh, Wiley!" And Wiley came out in the log, and he answered back, "Hello, hello!" And they kept calling back and forth, and his brother finally found him and took him on home. So that's a story about Wiley and a real fire that happened in the Smoky Mountains a long time ago. And from this story, everybody should realize what they should not do in a fire. If you get caught in a fire, don't go into a log. And there are no chestnut logs anymore because some blight killed most of them. What you should do is this. Get your cell phone and call 911. And that's the story about Wiley and the wildfire.